Right. So what we have discussed in the last session about the architectural vision part. So I have discussed about the architectural vision in reference to the TOGAF implementations, like requirements management in reference to the ADM framework principles, all that. And today I'm going to discuss about implementation governance, because governance process mechanism structure from organization to organization will be varied. So whenever we are implementing the governance structure from the organizational perspective, it's always important for us to prepare a compliance assessment document, because what kind of compliance standards, policies, and procedures do we require to follow when we are implementing the governance structure, especially when we are providing solutions for the customer requirements. At the same time, we should also understand about what are the changes might be taken place over a period of time, because once the implementation governance was done so far, that is something compatible with the changes whichever is required by the customer in future. This is where generally architectural change management come into existence. So this is the structure and the process which normally, when we want to implement governance standards and procedures and all everything in organization level, when we are implementing solutions from the enterprise perspective. So governance structure, process, compliance standards and all everything. On that reason, on that note, let me give you an example from the healthcare perspective. For example, when we are working on health, because majorly I'm not confining this only for healthcare. Of course, that I can relate for other domains as well. But out of the experience I had with the healthcare, I'm giving repetitively. I'm giving examples on that note. Let's say, for example, if you have taken healthcare domain into perspective, there are different formats in reference to the data when we are transforming from legacy applications to the new applications. There are some standards which normally we use, which is called HL7. So HL7 standards are the formats which normally we use is to integrate the data whenever we are transforming from the legacy applications to the new applications, or from existing systems to the proposed systems, all that. So when we are working on healthcare projects, especially whenever we are working on the healthcare segment, it's always important for us to understand about the compliance checklist based upon the standards what they want us to implement. So all these standards are completely based upon the kind of checklist which is called HIPAA. Because in the last sessions also, if you remember, I have given an example for HIPAA also. Because HIPAA is a kind of standards or a law which was initiated wherein to protect the health information of the individuals, whoever has taken treatment in the provider side. Because there are two: one is provider, second is a payer. Usually hospitals, healthcare clinics and all will be provided some treatment to the patients. The kind of procedure as well as the kind of standards they are following to provide treatment and all everything must be under the HIPAA guidelines. Next, at the same time, whenever there is a claim process happens, right? So if you are processing the claim for a particular case, which will be sent to the payer and all. So whatever the transactions we are going to send and all, everything must be in encrypted format. So this is where generally these HIPAA guidelines, rules and regulations are something useful, right? So when we are understanding the governance structure of any organization, it is always depends on the kind of domain they were coming from, because governance structure, policies, procedures, standards, whatever they follow, one way or other way, the primary focus is on the domain. Which domain are they coming from? Which domain they are coming from, right? So the domain perspective is not something we must be knowing for that for sure, right? So that is one thing we have to be known with. Governance structure, policies, procedures, etc. So this is not something only confined to the data what we are sharing from the provider to payer, but it is also important it is also important the kind of systems we are using, because whatever the kind of systems or the format of data we are working on, the kind of systems as well as the administrative procedure, what is that they follow, everything must be falls under the HIPAA guidelines itself. So now coming back to the enterprise solution level, right? So when you are going to implement TOGAF framework, especially in the enterprise level transformation, enterprise level solution based and all that, understanding and as well as implementation governance is also one of the key and prominent element we have to be focused, right? So how are we going to implement the governance structure and all everything is what something we have to be seen with. Now, in this, the first case, what is that we have to do? We have to describe the compliance assessment overview, which majorly consists of these points. So the first one you can see, right? So these are the different points which was mentioned over here. Let me highlight it. Yeah, so whatever the compliance checklist do we have, you can see over here. So all these compliance checklists has to be assessed first. Now, if you want to assess this compliance checklist, first of all, we need to review the hardware and as well as operating system, right? So what kind of operating system are we going to use to develop the project? At the same time, whatever the hardware and software, all that. So, but when you want to review the infrastructure, whatever is needed for us to develop solution for a particular problem, make sure we need to understand to what extent HIPAA standards and procedures has to be integrated to this. Because as I told you, the kind of workstations are we using in the healthcare scenario, in the context of healthcare, I'm giving an example, will be of two things. One is from the provider side, second is a payer side. Provider side systems, whatever the kind of applications they were using and all everything are something to manage care administration and case administration of the patients. Either it can be it can be inpatient or outpatient, or it can be treatment, pre-treatment or post-treatment procedures, whatever the quality standards they want to implement. Everything for that, what kind of systems they were using from the provider perspective. Second, when we are going for the payer perspective where whatever the claim receivables they were receiving, right? So the kind of claim systems they are using, right? So different claim systems they use, right? So different like Facets or QNext, Health Edge, right? So different claim processing systems which will be used for them to receive the claims data. And whatever the adjudication process subsequently will be done by them. So for that, there are different systems which normally they use. Earlier, it was all on-premise applications because whatever the solutions are we going to provide, even of course, I'm not ruled out now, we are not providing on-premise. Even now, we are providing on-premise solutions. But most of the applications are moving towards cloud environment due to the operational difficulties, infrastructural challenges. Even nowadays, even claim systems applications are all cloud applications only, so that you don't require to manage operational infrastructure in the customer location. That's what something we have to be doing. I think what was this? I've got a message.
No, I just ping you the JD, whatever you ask.
Okay,
No,
okay, yeah.
carry
You
on,
just
please.
WhatsApp me. You just WhatsApp me this so that I will
Okay,
discuss.
sure.
I will keep this in mind when I'm discussing in coming day sessions.
Sure,
Okay.
sure. I will keep
Please
it.
do me in WhatsApp. Huh? Right, thank you. Right. So what we are discussing, like yeah, the kind of systems what they use and all of the thing is what something we do, right? So different claims applications and all of the thing we are using it. So reviewing the hardware configuration as well as the operating system checklist is all something which we have to be identified initially. That is also something essential important from the payer side, because different applications they uses to process the claims, etc. All that. Equally at the same time, they will be using different applications to make some changes in the existing insurance plans which they are releasing to the market. because depends on the depends on the requirement. Let's say, for example, recently, a couple of years back, we have faced a situation across the world because of the COVID. Okay, right. So, for example, there were some earlier, if you see, there was no treatment as such for COVID. So there was nothing as such called COVID or this thing, right? So nothing as such earlier. Now, what happened after post this pandemic, whatever we have faced across the world, there were some changes, there were some plans which have been introduced by the payers. So this is for the security and as well as the benefit of if there is any treatment requires and all everything in future, that possible reimbursement will be done accordingly. That's how generally the due to the due to the market conditions and all, this is all something will change. Along with this, if there are any business rules or government mandates which was changed so far, subsequently whatever the required changes to be made in the subsequent applications is what something we have to be focused more on. Right. So in this context, if you see here, whenever we are working on solution perspective, by understanding the governance structure and all that, we need to understand what kind of hardware and software, what kind of configuration is something essentially required for us to implement. Either it can be an on-premise application. If it's an on-premise application, how we are integrating and how these are incorporated, how these are interconnected with other systems. And if you are making any changes in the existing application, in what way it will impact us. Right. At the same time, when we are working on the cloud applications, because there will be a situation we come across, some will be on-premise applications, some will be a cloud applications, right? This is how it will be. So when there are some cloud applications we are using extensively for a very long time, it's always important for us to understand how these cloud applications must incorporate with the on-premise applications. So what sort of hardware and software is something which must be affordable, because budgetary constraints can also be there, right? So because of course we don't deal with the budget, but end of the day, for any solution there is some X amount of budget will be allocated. Make sure we have to provide solutions within the limited budget itself. This is where generally reviewing all these are something required. This is the first thing, right? So this is what the first thing we have to see. So it's not only about the hardware, even we have to see the software services as well as the middleware technologies, whatever we are implementing. Sometime back I told you, right? So different applications we use, like Facets, right? So QNext, Health Edge. These are the different applications will be used. The software is being used. Applications we are going to use to manage the claim processing, adjudication, right, etc. All that, right? So for that we also required to understand and review the hardware. Followed by this, we need to review the software services also. What are all the different software services we have to implement when we are working on the project, right? So we need to review what are the different software services we have, right? So what software services are acceptable, right? So because nowadays cloud applications, right? So cloud services are we using again in this? Are we choosing any software services or infra or platform services as separate, or is it something required hardware infrastructure services also we are using? If I'm talking about cloud services, all that, right? So we need to review what are the software services which are something acceptable as per the guidelines which was given by the healthcare organization. The next, we need to review the applications, right? So applications checklist means what kind of applications are we using in it? Because there will be some patient management applications which are involved in it. Because earlier, if you see, for every service, there is an individual application we used to work on in the beginning days, I'm saying. But nowadays, if you have seen here, nowadays, whatever the products we are working on, the product has a lot of modules where each and every services are being covered nowadays. So I don't say 100% it was 100% it was converted, but to an extent possible, if you see whatever the applications we are using nowadays, these applications were confining to one, right? So not many, right? Depends on the services to services and all that. So if you have seen especially in healthcare earlier, even patient management system, right? So appointments. So internal administration related stuff and all everything was separate earlier. And claim related stuff and all everything was separate earlier. But nowadays, when you are working on the applications, the products which which are available in the market were all healthcare core administrative system applications. Healthcare core administration means even including claim processing, right? At the same time, payments, billing, at the same time, even if you want to manage any kind of policies, right? So because if there is any policy configurations to be made by the payer, because different policies they come across, and whatever the rules and regulations and all everything might also require for them to change accordingly as per the need and all everything, they have to make subsequent changes in that. This is all something which we have to see in reference to the review of application checklist, right? What kind of applications are we using and how these applications are required for us when we are implementing governance structure, which is part of TOGAF implementation, all that. Next, we need to see how information management we were following, right? So how this information management is happening, right? So because how we are gathering the requirements. It's not only the requirements, how we are interacting with the customers and how means what is the way to it. Are we connecting them virtually? Are we connecting them in person, right? To gather the high level requirements from the end users and all that. Information management. This is all something comes under the information management part, right? So how we are managing the information and all that, right? So how we are collecting the data, because capturing the information is important. At the same time, storing and as well as integrating the information and uses of information. These are the four things which have to. So collecting the requirements on a high level note is important. At the same time, how you have collected. So there are different ways to do that, right? Either it can be, so we can conduct some interviews and we can get some information out of it, right? So through interaction, we'll be knowing many things. At the same time, exchanging of documents, presentations, files, etc. Or else conducting some group sessions where we will be knowing about their expectations versus reality, all that. Or else through observation also, we will be knowing many things. So this is all something, how and what generally information are we gathering? First of all, we have to capture the information. That is one way to do that. So once we are capturing the information, how are we storing it? Are we storing this in the document format? Is there any digital format we are following? Any applications as such we are using? Let's say, for example, when we are working on the traditional practices and all that, whatever the documentations we do, everything will be on the format. In document format, we do it. But now when we are moving towards agile environment, if you have seen here, I don't say no documentation because agile doesn't say that no documentation. Of course, we follow no documentation also because 100% agile we don't do, right? So depends on the depends on the team what we have and all everything. This is all something will be varied, right? So this is where generally this information management we are following different tools nowadays called Confluence and all that, right? So Confluence, all these are document collaborative tools, right? So if you want to write down the product requirements, or if you want to write down the meeting notes, or if you want to mention any retrospections or review meetings and all, whatever the updations were made, right? If there is any capacity planning was made so far by the team, by the Scrum master levels, and all, right? So how they are going to manage this information, especially when we are following agile and all, so we use different tools we are using like Confluence, Trello, right? So all these things are we using nowadays. I'm talking about information management, how we are managing the information from the agile perspective. If it is from the traditional practices we are using and all, so what are the documents we follow and whatever the different documentations do we require to follow. So again, vision document is one of the first document which normally we prepare, right? So project vision document. So after vision document, the next is business case document will be prepared, not by architect level, okay? From the business owner level or business people level, I'm saying all this, underline this point, right? So business requirements level documents will be prepared. So once the requirements document level was prepared, the next high level designs and low level designs will be prepared by the technical team. So based on that software requirement specification, which will be included in it. So how are we going to manage and review the information management, and what is the checklist do we require to follow? What are the list of documentations? It's not only documentations, what tools are we using to visualize the requirements is also important, right? How you are visualizing the requirements. That's where generally all these comes into picture. Whatever whatever the high level designs, low level designs, whatever are we going to prepare, or process flow maps or data mapping. For example, if there is any migration projects we're working on. If you are working on migration projects and all, data mapping is needed. So how you are mapping the data with the staging environment in the database we are creating. Because when we want to map the data, or when we are migrating the application from one application to another application, this is where generally we have to create a staging environment, and staging database is what something we have to create first. So by performing landscape analysis and all everything, so staging the environment, creating a staging environment and data is required. Next, when there is any transformation of data we do, so what kind of file format customer is expecting? Is it something in the file format called XML, or any kind of JSON files they wants to see? Because the file format what was used in the other application might be something different than the one which customer is expecting so far. So this is where generally this migration process come into picture. So for that, migration planning based checklist, or migration planning structured data migration, as well as how you are going to map the data from as is to be system. This is where we see, which is called gap analysis. Gap analysis from as is to be is what something we see. This is all something comes under the information management perspective, right? So that also we have to be reviewed. This is point number 4. Next, we have to review the security checklist, because this is where, again, if you can go back to the healthcare side, as I told you, right? So HIPAA majorly tells that, because whatever the health information we wants to update in the systems and all, everything will be in encrypted format. This is not something you can see it on the file, because earlier we used to have all those in the paper formats, but nowadays everything is digitalized, and whatever the documentation, whatever the process we have followed and all, everything based on the number, because for everything there will be a number we use, like 835, 834, all that. Right? So different numbers are being used in this. Using that encryption number, right, EDI, because this is all happens in the electronic format. This is where we call it as EDI transactions, electronic data interchanges. Means whatever the data we are transforming from one system to another system, everything in electronic format using different code numbers, because for procedure as separate, for diagnosis it can be as separate. At the same time, for the claim related stuff, this can be as separate. So this is all something which comes under the security perspective. So for that, what else are the security tools? Is there any other security tools or security standards to protect the data? Is what something we are using or not? Everything has to be reviewed over here. This is where generally security checklist and all everything will be coming into picture. Next, we need to review the system management, right? So how are we going to manage the systems, right? So all these things that also has to be reviewed. Next, system engineering practices. Is there any system engineering practices are we following or not? That also will be taken into an account. Next, what are the different methods and tools we are using, right? So either it can be for development level, right? So because normally nowadays we have all internal tools available in the organization to, what are the tools are we using, except to manage except to manage project management, except project management, project tracking and all. Nowadays, whatever the applications for visualization purpose and all that, so we have our own tools, or else we have different tools like, as you can see, like Visual Paradigm, or else we may have Visio, right? So at the same time, we have UML diagrams for that to prepare, like we can use Star UML software or Rational Rose. Earlier, it was there for a very long time, right? So what kind of methods and as well as the kind of tools are we following all that? Again, when it comes to the review of the methods and all, when it comes to the methods, I can say even approaches also come into picture, because development approaches, when we follow agile, for example, we are following agile practices in implementation level. When we are providing solutions, when we are following implementation level and all, there are different engineering practices we follow, something like test-driven development model, or it can be feature-driven development, it can be behavioral-driven developments, or it can be model-driven development, right? So pair programming, right? So this is all something different methods for application development or solution perspective we are developing. Followed by this, what are the kind of tools do we require to use, and all these things has to be analyzed. So these are all the information which has to be analyzed, being into transformation of implementing TOGAF framework, especially when we are going to implement governance structure, especially in the organization. This is what generally, these are the review items which we have to be identified and which we have to be reviewed. So for that, for this to analyze the compliance checklist and all that, so of course we need to identify the responsibility of organization. These are the high level things, because this is all I have discussed a couple of times, because defining the scope and review, right? So reviewing the project principles. This is all I have discussed here. So because these are the base points which are required if you want to develop and analyze the compliance checklist and all, these are the base points we have to be focused more on. This is something which we have to be known with. Based on that, required compliance assessment document is what something will be prepared by us, right? So this is one phase, right? The first phase is this in implementation governance. This is the first phase. The second phase about the development phase, right? So in this development phase, where there are any changes to be made. For example, when we are making any kind of changes, once the architect, yes, sorry, it was disconnected, I think, right? Am I audible now? Kalai, Ranjit, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Kalai yourself? Kalai. Okay, fine. Right, so this is where generally this architect change management come into picture, because if there is any kind of changes to be made in the existing application, existing architecture, right? So whatever the requests were made by the stakeholders and all, whatever the change request we have identified so far. So for that subsequent architectural change request, for that architectural change management, whatever the change order requests are we preparing. So how the change management process we follow. Because when you want to make some changes in the existing architecture or the solution towards attaining the results and all, it's always important for us to identify the impact of the project as well as the budget as well. Because project impact analysis is what something we have to be, not we as an analyst part and say, okay, not by us. Right. So impact analysis, impact assessment analysis is what something they have to do with. Means how, in what way it is getting impacted, project is getting impacted. But when it comes to the project impact and all, yes, project management team followed by technical management team has to be involved, right? So if there is any project impact analysis, if you want to see. If it is budget impact analysis, that is not something to do with our role, because architect roles and all that. So that will be taken care of by the project management team. So they will be taken care of all that. So this is where generally this architectural change request is what something will be prepared here. So this is how generally this implementation governance is what something we implement whenever we follow TOGAF, especially when we are working on enterprise solutions level. Is it clear? Ranjit and Kalai, do you understand?
Yeah, it's clear, Raj.
Ranjit yourself?
Yes, yes.
Right, so this is where implementation governance come into picture. Once the implementation governance is done, the next it can be architectural change management, right? So all these things, either it can be migration planning, right? So at the same time, architectural change management come into picture, right? So how are we managing the architectures and all everything is what something we do. So this is all something which are comes under the ADM principles, architectural development method principles. By understanding, if you want to manage your requirements in detail, right from the preliminary stage, right from the architectural vision to architectural change management. So these are the things which, when we are implementing TOGAF framework, especially in enterprise level architecture, this is what something being a solution architect we have to be good with. Do you understand this? Clear? So this is all. So whatever I have explained you in a high level note, of course, even because TOGAF I haven't go through in detail, because there are not many things to be covered in TOGAF. So that's not our major focus. Our major focus towards solution perspective. So from the next week onwards, of course, from this week onwards, I mean to say coming weekend onwards, we'll be discussing on, again, we'll go back to high level designs, low level designs. So mostly I use UML. UML diagrams are one way to do it, because anyway, you have an idea over the UML diagrams. But high level designs to create low level designs and all, how this can be implemented. So followed by this, I'll start this AWS also, right? Solution architecture, whatever I have told you in the beginning, right? So solution, cloud related architecture, cloud related solutions perspective. So that I'm going to start from there onwards. Is it clear, Ranjit and Kalai? And we will discuss
Yeah,
on the JD part also in coming days. If there is any
yeah.